For a decade now, some of the most vibrant and cutting-edge cinema in Southeast Asia has been coming out of the Philippines. It's a resurgence in a country with a rich film tradition, but whose output ran dry in the 80s and 90s. Economically and politically, the Philippines faces huge challenges, not to mention the deadly drugs war launched by its new president, which has a dizzying body count after just 1 year. And yet, the films keep coming.
But what factors have contributed to the renaissance of Filipino cinema? I will be speaking to two of its leading directors, born just 1 year apart from each other, Lav Diaz and Brillante Mendoza.
In this first episode, we will be speaking to Lav Diaz, who has come on a rare visit to London to attend a symposium and screenings of his work here at Westminster University. These projections are exceptional occasions, given the length of Diaz's work. This is a showing of one of his first films from 2001, Batang West Side, which is just over 5 hours long, and since then he has made others almost double that running time. His most recent film, The Woman Who Left, won the Golden Lion at Venice, and this one clocks in at just under 4 hours, one of his shortest films. More than half a century ago, cinema in the Philippines was flourishing. It would enjoy two golden ages in the 1950s and 1970s. Some of the nation's most enduring classics were made in those periods, including this one from Lino Brocka, Insang, in 1975. And also Ishmael Bernal's Nunal sa Tubig a year later. These directors faced the censorship of the Marcos regime head-on, making powerful, socially conscious and political films. After a peak in Filipino productions in the 1980s, a catastrophic decline followed. Competition from Hollywood, the corrosive effects of piracy, and an enduring, crippling poverty were all factors in the decline. But today the situation has changed dramatically again, and we can legitimately talk about a third wave.
But how did this happen? It's all the more remarkable, given the Philippines is still hit by grinding poverty, deep corruption, and massive, deadly typhoons. I want to speak to both directors about how they make their films, and what happened in the early 2000s to make the Filipino third wave possible.
When I spoke to Lav Diaz in London, he started by telling me how he first got into filmmaking and what inspired him to pick up a camera when he had no formal training.
There's no film school in the Philippines during my youth, when I was in college, so there are workshops, But of course, cinema is not just that. It's more of your background. Like, I grew up in a place where there are 4 theaters. Films from Hong Kong, from Italy, the spaghetti westerns, and from Hollywood. So the gamut, just watch everything. And he would just talk about cinema forever. For me, that's my film school.
If we come on to something that I'm sure you're asked a lot, but about the length of your films, whether that for you is also a way of getting across certain ideas and certain I mean, what is behind that reason?
Well, it's the issue of liberation, liberating the praxis, because it's always an imposed thing. We always believe that the level of endurance in viewing this so-called cinema, it shouldn't go beyond 2 hours. And it's not
an
true.
Hour 37 minutes, I think.
and it's an imposed thing. The motive is profit. Why it shouldn't go beyond an hour and a half or 2 hours? Because if your film is 2 hours, at least you can show it in cinemas for 5 times a day.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's bigger profit.
Yeah.
That's very Hollywood.
History and politics, they are very, very present in your films. In Norte, for example, there are long political, ideological discussions between the characters.
Diba yun nga yung pangarap ni Rizal? Pero paano? Kailan? Wala. Hindi ubra.
Kahit naman yung diktadura dati, hindi naman umubra eh.
Kasi nga, lumambot yung putang ng puso ni Makoy. Di ba? Kaso, sandali lang daw yung martial law. Di ba? ibabalik na daw niya yung democracy. Ang ginawa niya, dinemocratize niya yung pangangamkam. Hindi lang daw dapat marami sila.
Spread the love.
Umabot nga eh. Wala. Kinonsensya siya. Ayun, dahil doon bumagsak siya. Diba? Tapos pagkatapos ng ginawa niya, nagsimula siya magpa-eleksyon. Wala na, tuloy-tuloy na. Natural. Pero sa simula,
I based the character on the young Marcos, how fascism started in the country. It's like all these extreme ideologies that's coming. So fundamentalism and everything. Norte is about that. It's based on the young dictator Marcos, and we shot the film in the very places where he grew up.
So it's extremely present in your films, but at the same time, I don't have a sense of watching a film with a political message.
Yeah,
or,
it's
know.
not didactical, like, where
No.
there's real characters. That's what I'm trying to do with my cinema. Although there's signposting or some sort of a referencing to some period of our struggle, but at the same time, I don't want to do propaganda cinema. I want to create real narrative, real characters. The suffering of a guy in the street mirrors the macro,
That was a very strong scene in Norte as well, when the young woman is having to sell off the elements of their cafe, and then this big lady comes to sort of buy it off.
Yeah.
But it does explain so much more about how business is done, and who does the business. And also, I was struck by the fact that it was women who were doing that.
oh,
ayan ha. Bilangin mo. Binawas ko na yung kalahati ng utang niyo dyan, ha?
Salamat po.
It does come up a lot. I mean, I've noticed that women are often featuring a lot in your films, and whether it does represent sort of Filipino culture and society.
Well, the Malay culture is also very macho, but in terms of the deeper parts of our lives, it's very matriarchal. Women's role, the woman's role in our culture is very, very important. Decision making, even from decision making to nurturing, it's the woman. The woman. Even if you take away the Catholic perspective that was imposed on us, the Malay people are very matriarchal.
A question that came to me when actually watching a lot of Brilliante Mendoza's films, I was struck by how many female characters he used, often as protagonists, of a certain age sometimes, maybe sort of over 50, which is so strikingly different from sort of a lot of European cinema and Hollywood, certainly, where you have really very macho and no strong roles for women over 50.
I don't know why they do that.
It's
very oppressive,
Very, but just in terms of your film, the women who left, and is it based on a true story or?
It's the struggle of this woman, being imprisoned for 30 years for a crime she didn't commit. It's just somebody, set up all. She was framed up, and then she suffered for 30 years. She lost her family. It's, again, it's about that. An examination of the nature of torment, of trauma, the nature of human suffering. Yeah, it's a very specific thing about this woman, but you magnify it. 30 years would be like the 300 years of colonization under Spain. And you cannot escape the trauma until now.
I wanted to ask a question about language and how Because obviously the Filipino language is a mixture of different languages.
It's Malay, Malay language, and we call it Tagalog, the major language in the country. And there's a mix of Spanish in it and English.
And English,
Colonization, all these post-colonial effects.
Is it a source of tension in any way? Because I know that in one of your films, Batang West Side, there's a scene where a man tells a woman to speak in her own language rather than in English. And I wondered whether at any point there is a sense that when you speak English, you're somehow, it's somebody else's language, or whether it's entirely appropriated.
In the Philippines, it's always a class thing, you know. The intelligentsia, the bourgeois would be speaking Spanish and English. And in the masses, of course, it's Tagalog.
Okay.
So it creates that divide also.
Until notice of the order overruling the motion has been served upon the accused, yung asawa niyo po, or his counsel, ako po yun, at which time the balance of the period begins to run. Yun po yun, Mrs.
Wala po akong maunawaan. Hindi po ako marunong mag-English.
They watch TV and the news is in English, and they barely understand sometimes what's happening. Again, you connect that language, you connect that with the question, why Duterte is in power?
Yeah.
Because the people were like, you know, cut off. They're not part of the big discourse.
In your cinema, there's a lot, that's very strong sort of sense of history and accounting for history and showing history as a way of making sure that we don't forget.
If you don't examine history, if you don't confront history, if you don't come to terms with your past, how can you move? Even the very current martial law years, people forgot about it already. You talk to the young, they don't know about it. And it's very recent. Martial law ended in 1986. It's the darkest period in our history. They forgot about the 70,000 victims of torture, you know. People have gone missing during those years. It's like erased, you know. And this new president is, you know, he idolizes Marcos.
Yeah.
In 8 months, there are like 8,000 murders. It's a huge crime against humanity. The irony of it is the masses, they love him.
But it's the poorest people that are getting killed.
Yeah, he's a madman. He's a madman. And I don't know why, because it's not just the masses. I have friends who really believe in him.
Yeah,
Artists,
right.
intellectuals, people from the academy, political thinkers.
And with Duterte, I mean, can you envisage a sort of a way of kind of cinematic response to that kind of situation?
We have to sustain engagement in all the mediums, from cinema to dance to music. That's the only way we can fight with integrity. We cannot just go to the street and be killed to fight apathy, to fight indifference, to fight ignorance. Because cinema can educate, music can educate, you know. We have to examine the past and, you know, adjust it to what's happening now. Why are we having the same vicious cycle? Why do we keep repeating the mistakes of history? Yeah.